Hi there, hello, my name's Lance, great to see you. Now, today we're doing another one of our real-time, one-to-one speed draw-alongs. We're going to be drawing this here. We'll go through the entire thing, sketch, line art, colors, such as it is, and shading, and then a little bit of post-processing. Now, this is based off the requests that have been put forward on the straw poll on the Discord. The results are a bit spread out, so I've had to ball a few of them together, so these are the ones I'm trying to sort of combine today. Now, if you like this kind of video, I've got a few more in a bit of a playlist. I'll put them in the description. And then I've also got a bunch of tutorials you can watch. So if you like learning about art and you'd like to see how to do things like bodies, heads, hands, etc., I've got a bunch of those videos as well. Now, if you like what you see and you'd like to support the channel, consider hitting like, subscribe, leave a comment to let me know what sort of subjects you'd like or what sort of tutorials you'd like to see in future. And if you're in a position to do so, you can join the Patreon to help these videos happen more often or at least more reliably. Now, if you do follow along and draw your own rendition of this image, which I would love to see, you can pop over to our Discord, linked in the description, and pop it in there. I go through all the homeworks and look over them every couple of days, and hopefully at some point soon I'll be able to catch up on giving feedback for all of them. Let's see how we go. Otherwise, without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, beginning then, I want an image that's going to have a bit of perspective going. So for me to do that, I'm going to just rough out what sort of perspective I want here. So these are going to be two parallel lines that are going to sort of simulate the lines going towards a vanishing point, just to give me an idea and a sort of rough outline of how I'm going to narrow these in perspective. Because, as you saw from the intro, one of the things people would like to do is a drawing with a bit more perspective. So here we go. Now, as I go, one of the other things I'm going to do is I'm going to start this, instead of with the soft organic shapes, I'm going to start with fairly blocky shapes because they're much easier to get in perspective. And this cross here, you can see that I'm drawing across the frame. What that's about is if you draw a corner-to-corner cross across a rectangle, even if the rectangle is in perspective, where they cross in the middle will be the halfway point. And this is covered off in my perspective video. So if you're interested in that, pop over. I'll put a link to that one here in the video. And that can give you a bit of a starting point on how to put these together and just give yourself a bit of a simple scaffolding. So just to quickly illustrate that point, if you have a rectangle here, I'll just quickly draw this out and then we'll get back to the painting in a sec. And I put a cross through the middle. That point in the middle, where those two diagonal lines cross, will be halfway, lengthwise, and top to bottom. Now, if that same rectangle is in perspective and it's been foreshortened, it still works. If I go corner to corner, so one corner there, another one there, that point where they cross is the middle. And you can see it's much closer to one end because of foreshortening. And to prove this, if I get my rectangular one and I distort it into perspective, you'll see that it will match up just fine. That cross in the middle does sit in the same spot. So it's a very nice sort of simple way of roughing out where halfway would be between two things in perspective. Just break it up into a square if you can, or a rectangle, and then find that center point. And you can keep dividing over and over again after that point. So if I've got halfway down and I want to find, okay, what's a quarter? Well, I just divide one of the halves in half. And I can keep going as many times as I need to measure things out. So that's what I'm doing here. I've got those two lines there, are the sort of sides of my sort of imaginary bounding box. And I've just got those rough shapes down to give me an idea of where I would expect halfway down to be, because this is going to be a fairly high angle picture. Now I'm just going to erase that out partially. You'll notice one thing I don't do is erase out completely. Whenever I'm sketching, I'll only erase out a little bit, so I can still see the marks I had before, because I want to sort of build on them roughly, but I also want to sometimes improve on them. So it's good to have them sort of like if you're playing darts, you can see the shots you missed, and they sort of tell you where you need to go. Do you need to go harder? Do you need to, less effort? That kind of thing. And so now I'm going to start on just some box shapes. So you can see here, this is that top quarter I measured out for myself very roughly. And so I'm going to do a fairly short character. And so their head's going to be roughly the top sort of, top fifth or quarter of the length of the body. And I'm just roughing these out. I'm not going to do too much sort of measuring perspective, setting up vanishing points with, tools and rulers and so forth. I just want a sort of fairly basic sort of vibes based one. I want the perspective to serve my design and not have to try and figure out a design in perspective. I'll do what I want the image to look like, and then I'll see where the perspective needs to fit after the fact. Seems a bit backwards, I know, but it is definitely worth sort of having your design be the first thing, your concept be the leading point, and then from there you sort of do the accuracy and the technicalities after that once you've got a design that you like. And so now I'm just doing the boxy shapes for the limbs. And you notice, for me, normally I start with much more sort of rounded or stick figure things, then I build the volumes out. With perspective drawing, I find this is when I do actually use the sort of box method for body construction, because it's much better to use those simple, more geometric shapes when you're positioning things in perspective. So in this case, when I'm viewing them from a fairly high angle, and I've got a lot of foreshortening, and I've got to sort of plan objects in front of other other objects. So I'm just doing out the arms here. 512, 513, 514. And then I'm also going to do like a demon girl with kind of curly goat horns. The sort of spiral shapes can be a bit tricky in perspective, so I'm going to give them a bounding box as well. For two reasons. One, it makes it easy to sort of figure out a sort of front face and a side face, etc. But also it's good to use that to count out the volumes. So I've just got the pretty basic sort of boxes here. One of the things that does get a bit tricky in perspective is the rib cage. With the rib cage being narrower at the top and wider at the bottom, when you put that in perspective from a high angle, the top of it will widen because it gets bigger, because it gets closer to the viewer, and the bottom of it will narrow, and you end up with a sort of more oval shape than a sort of egg shape. And so now I'm just going to go over the separate color. The reason you'll see me change color in my sketch is that it can be kind of hard to make out the difference between the sketch I was doing before and the sketch, for this stage of it. So I'll often change color to know sort of what layer, what level I'm up to. And so these two lines here, I'm drawing back in towards the head from that front plane of the box. I'm using that front plane of the box to roughly figure out where the eyes would be. And I'm just going to replace some of that perspective there to sort of cement my my view on this as being a high angle one, because that's about as big as the head would be down at the feet. And I'm just drawing that there to sort of keep it in line with that vanishing point and foreshortening. And then just trying to get some sort of shape on here, like the nose and the eyes. Remembering the nose would be drawn a little bit sort of further down, since we're drawing the face from a fairly high angle. There'll be a lot more sort of forehead. And just doing the jaw into the head. Again, it's quite a sort of small, short character, so I'm going to do fairly big sort of, eyes on it. And I'll adjust these shapes and sizes in a bit. I just want to have them down and get those base volumes in before I start sort of building it up. So here I'm getting onto the rib cage, and one of the things we've got to remember is that front center line of the rib cage, and then the pelvis. Since it's from a fairly high angle, I've got to make sure there's a decent amount of overlap between those two base shapes. If you imagine like a train with all the carriages, when you see them from the side, there's no overlap. But if you see a train coming or a train leaving, there's a lot of overlap between those parts, so I've got to make sure I've got a decent amount there to help communicate that depth. Having things overlap each other in the frame is a great way of having depth, and so if you're doing a perspective image like this, you need a lot of overlap wherever you can from even just one part to another, just to help sort of promote that depth in the frame. And so now just doing the ankles and feet there. And I am going to have to come in later on that one and make the shins shorter and the thighs longer, because just like with the body, if it's halfway and it's in perspective, then halfway should be closer to the bottom than the top. And what I've done there is I've sort of fallen back, and you'll find this, I don't know if you will, but I do find this with myself, is when I'm drawing in perspective, I'll have a sort of normalizing impulse, where, for instance, with the legs there, you can see the mistake I've made is I've not drawn the knees down far enough. They're halfway between the pelvis and the ground visually, but they should actually be closer to the feet because perspective would make the shins appear shorter. Right. And now I'm just going to do a bit of work with the lasso tool here just to sort of move a few things around. For those of you working traditionally, my apologies, this isn't something that's going to be as easily made into part of your process. So this one, given the angle of the face, it didn't really make that much sense to have the head that far forward, so I've just sort of pulled it back a little bit, and I'll have the body sort of tilt back, sort of that pose from the it was Thriller, is that the one? Anyway. And then just trying to remember where the shoulder and everything would be. Even though I'm not going to draw it, it's going to be sort of occluded by the head and the face. I still have to have the shoulder coming to the right point, otherwise the arm will be coming out from the wrong angle. So that's another example of where it's important to draw the invisible parts, or at least it's as important to draw the invisible parts as it is to draw the visible parts. And so now, with a better idea of where the face is going, I'm going to redraw those bounding boxes for where I'm planning to put the horns, or the coil of the horns. Now I'm just going to partially erase the legs there. I'm going to merge my sketches all together into one. I don't tend to keep the sketches, so if I'm going to be working on top of them, I'll just merge them in and work with it. And you can see here, I've got to draw the knees a bit further down. So I'm making a little sort of scaffold for myself of a straight sort of rectangular shape to try and find out where the knees would look right. Around there as well. And I can see with this kind of angle of perspective, it's probably going to be halfway, would be about sort of 2/3 of the way down, anytime it's sort of split in half. So with that, I'm just going to redo the legs, and you can see it looks much more accurate with the knees much closer to the ankles. Whereas if you're drawing them sort of front on, having the knees 2/3 of the way down the leg would look terrible. But that's one of the things with foreshortening. It's that placement and getting everything sort of sorted in perspective that makes it work. And again, I've got a video on perspective if you want to get into that one. It's a lot. It's a good video. More people should watch it. You know, I think. And now I'll start sort of thinking about how I want the face to be. I'm thinking a fairly intense kind of angry look, just because viewing something from above makes it look kind of small and vulnerable, and sort of to contrast that, I wanted something sort of small and adorable, but in like a really fierce kind of ferocious sort of pose, like a little monster, but it's like adorable. So that's that sort of the conflict there I wanted. I wanted to have something that is small and is cute and is being depicted in a way that makes it look, you know, small and vulnerable, and then at the same time to give it a sort of a combative look and pose. I think that would be really cute as a sort of pair of contrasting elements. Alright, that's my rough sort of sketch down. Now I might start getting in and doing a bit of refinement now that these are, well, now that the base forms are where I want them to be. When you're doing a sketch, don't start on your detail until you get the base formed in the right spot. You might start drawing a head and then start detailing, you know, facial features and start detailing fingers and the shoulders, and then realize that the head and neck are in the wrong spot. So make sure you've got your base elements in the right place first before you even start on any detail, because you may need to lasso and move things around, and if you start on detail, either two things will happen. You'll have to redo the detail, or worse yet, you won't when you should have. And that's called getting precious, and don't get precious. So if that's something you want to sort of work on, then I recommend holding off. One way to get around it, and you'll notice that this is all staying zoomed out. I'm staying on the same brush, I'm not zooming into any areas. Essentially disenable yourself, if this is something you're struggling with, disenable yourself from zooming in on your canvas, and that'll prevent you from even engaging with the detail before its time. So decent sized brush like this one's about 20, and my thick line art in this is probably going to be about 10. That's pixels, but that'll depend on your document size. Like if your document size is massive, then 20 pixels will be nothing. Whereas if your document size is tiny, then 20 pixels might be halfway across it. So a nice solid sized brush to prevent you from getting into the detail. And I'm just doing the curly horns here, 14, 23, 24, 25. And getting some of the hairdo in. I want hair that's going to have a bit of contrast with the shape of the horns, because since this one's going to be monochrome as per the request, that does sort of limit the kinds of contrast I can have to make an image pop. So the typical kinds of contrast you'll have is things like value contrast, which is the most important. You've got color contrast, you've got contrast of hue, you've got contrast of like levels of detail, like we've got like busy area versus a sort of fairly quiet area. Now this one, I'm doing a fairly straightforward image to make it in time, and it's monochrome, which does take a few of those off the table. So now I want to make sure I've got contrast of things like shape and form to really make part of it pop. So that's what the very angular square-edged hair against the big sort of horns is about. Now for reasons of expediency, I'm just going to do a fairly simple hand there. And I'm going to throw some very, very simple shapes in for the shirt. And just give it a bit of sort of fluttering and movement to help give the character a bit more sort of movement, because it's supposed to be a fairly dynamic pose. So I'm just going to fit some dynamism in where I can put dynamism without adding too much sort of challenge to this one. Just keep it accessible. And just doing some base shapes there for the forms. I'm not going to do too much detail on the clothing. Now that line you've seen me draw just there, that's the sartorius. Actually one of the more important muscles in the body, at least when shaping the legs. It makes the muscle, it's sort of like this band, like a seatbelt, that wraps around from the corner of the hips to just above the knee. And it causes the flesh just above the knee to dip in, and that's why the knee tends to sort of show up more, like the bone of the knee tends to show up more on the inside edge of the leg than the outside. So that's the sartorius there. So a really great way of just quickly mapping that out to help you shape the thighs. And I'm doing the waistband here for the skirt, and trying to remember that the curve needs to be not a perfectly round curve, because the body, like the cross-section of the body, it's not a perfectly cylindrical thing. It's more of a sort of a flattened cylinder shape. And then based on that waistband, I'm doing another one around to do where the skirt is. So that's coming around there, and I'm going to try and do sort of relatively evenly spaced notches in it, with limited success, but close enough is good enough. And now plotting out where the navel will be. If you are wanting to know, how to plot the navel, how to build the pelvis out, I've got a video on how to do the butt and pelvis, so I'll link that one there as well, because that can be kind of handy if that's something you want to sort of get better at. And now I've got a lot of the base forms in pretty sharply. I've still got to get in and do things like the arm and the shoes here, so I'm going to do some big sort of puffy socks. Again, I've got a very limited amount of contrast types I can use, so with this I'm going to do big, just nothing on the legs, have them just be sort of smooth forms, and then when we get to the shoes, I'm going to do those big leg warmers, I think they're called, just to give me a way of disrupting that silhouette, to break up that rhythm. So I've got these big smooth areas, and then I've got these big puffy things at the bottom there, just to really break that up. And same thing there, I'm starting on the shoulder of the t-shirt. I'm going to have that be a really loose t-shirt for a couple of reasons. One, the shirt will have different shape language to the arm, and two, it's going to be a big different sort of form, and it'll have different sort of shape language in how it expresses as well. And so I'm going to do the other hand also facing backwards for reasons of expediency. And now I'm just going to try and get the idea for the eyes. The reason I'll do the eyes and so forth last is I can get stuck in them for ages. They're one of the ones that sort of draws me in like a black hole. And I'm plotting out the line there for where the tail's going to go. And I've got little markers there for wings, if I remember. And they're just going to be simple black shapes. I'm not going to do too much on this one. Since I'm working with tone, that tone is going to be essentially all the punch I've got to sort of swing. So I'm going to be using the black wing, the black tail as some hard black areas, just to get me that sort of contrast. And here I'm planning out on the horn where I want those sort of sections to go. I'm not going to do too many sections since it's fairly cartoony. I don't really have to worry too much about like how much detail to put on it. And I'm just trying to fix up some of the width there, because the horn's supposed to go in a very even way from thick to thin, but I've got a bit of a thick to thin to thick going on there. It looks kind of slug-like. So I've got to fix that up. The other one won't be very visible. I've just got to make sure I get the angle right for the first few strokes, and the rest will just be implied that the rest is in order. So long as I get the first couple of strokes invisible, the viewer will just assume everything else went to plan like a Bond villain. And now I'm just going to fix up some of the folding on the shirt there, just because it's not quite going where I want, and it's sitting a little bit high. Like I want it to come down a bit lower. And then a bit more of these sort of hard crease things there, and trying to lead my creases and my folds and marks of stretch from one thing to another. Because that's the thing with clothing, it'll have a very clear sort of starting direction, and then it'll have a flow that it affects with everything else. This is another thing that I've got another video on. If you're interested in doing clothing, I'll put a link to that one as well. And I'm just doing the skirt there, just detailing that out. And doing a few little simple folds. I'm not going to go too far with the folds in this. You can do a lot of folds if you want. Like actual silk has, you know, countless folds. You can spend all day drawing that, and that could be fun. For this, though, I'm going to do fairly simplified folds. And here I'm just sort of testing out whether I want to go with black sclera. I think it's sclera or sclera, whatever it is. And then putting in the base shape for the wing. And that's kind of looking all right. It's coming together. My plan for perspective got everything sort of roughly in the right spot. The body forms are working fairly well also. That's looking good. And now I'm having a bit of a think about like simple lighting. So I've got some shadows I've just scribbled in behind the feet there. And then sort of thinking about getting the waistband a bit more neat on the skirt. And maybe having the front bangs or the fringe, whatever they're called, having that come a bit closer to the horns there, and going with like, I'm thinking at this point white hair on dark skin, but I think I ended up going with almost black hair. Redoing a bit of the fold there, just to make sure it's a bit less even. If the folds are all the sort of same thickness all over, they'll look kind of blobby. So if you've got a fold, make sure it's got a thick bit and a thin bit. Make sure you don't reuse the same size of fold anywhere. That's okay. Just thinking about getting that line for the top of the head right, just tuning it in a little bit, and then maybe adding a bit of a crease where the wrists join the hands. Lowering the opacity on that one, making a new layer, and we'll call this layer ink. A lot of the detail you can see is still fairly rough on the sketch, and that's okay. The sketch doesn't have to be a finished illustration, it just has to have enough there, enough information and enough scaffolding, that when you go in to do the line art, that you've got enough to sort of draw on. Literally and figuratively to draw upon, but also to draw upon. I didn't clarify things, did it? Right. Just getting a sort of smooth line there. And just going up some of these. This bit's a very mechanical part of the process. So when I'm drawing, something like this, when I'm at the inking phase, I'm not really using a lot of my creative brain, so I don't really have to worry about getting distracted. So I tend to listen to things like podcasts or, listen to the news, listen to music. So it's worth having like different phases of your drawing with different things you do to sort of help your productivity. I have just galloping ADHD, so for me there's a lot of different things I can use to sort of keep myself engaged, or alternately things I have to avoid because it keeps me too engaged with other stuff and I get nothing done. So I'm just going to get these rough shapes. I want them sort of bulgy and bulby. It kind of looks like a witchetty grub, but that's okay. It can look like that. It's a demon after all. Same thing for the hair. Now you notice with the sketch, I never do Control Z. I just erase it because I want to sort of keep my mistakes in the sketch. because I want to build on them. So I'll leave them sort of partially visible, because that never ends up in the final work anyway. It gets hidden. The layer gets turned off. I will Control Z when I'm doing the inking though. Not too many times, for two reasons. One, if I've done a Control Z on a line too many times, that tells me I'm approaching it wrong. I need to, rotate the canvas. I need to, flip it, do something else, approach that form in a different way. So that's one of the big reasons why you shouldn't be doing too much Control Z on your inking. The other one is it just takes too long. If it's just not working perfect, have an imperfect section, because at least then your work will be finished. If you ever get stuck trying to go after perfection, you get nothing done, you don't get any drawings finished, and since you get better from getting drawings finished, it hurts your progress. Which seems antithetical, but it is one of the times where making it as good as you can makes you, as an artist, less good. Which seems silly, but if you just got to remember that you get better by getting numbers out the door, not by getting them finely tuned. So I'm just doing more and more of these little sort of papery square-ended bits of hair there, and just throwing in some sort of random pointed bits just here and there to give it more of an organic shape, and doing my best not to repeat the sizes of any sections here. So if I have them regularly spaced, it'll look like the teeth on a bandsaw, and that won't look like hair. Hair is an irregular organic thing. And so now moving on to some of the hair that's going to frame the face. So I'll start with this bit here, little loose bits flying away there. And I'm working on the language here because I'm just not liking having too many sort of pointed bits next to each other. So I'm going to try and go for really harder, more square-shaped language leading up into it. And here is the jawline. If you want to go and get a cup of tea, now's the time. Look, I battle with getting the jawline just right every time, so it takes me a few goes. I do apologize for the wait. It is a known issue. It is a thing I'm working on. I just want to get it like just so. And eventually I settle on a that'll do. And I'm going to make the mouth a bit more crooked, actually, to make it look more irritated. One of the things that makes a mouth look angry isn't just like the fact that the corners turn down. It's that asymmetrical nature that can make it look kind of sort of annoyed. It's that I think it's because the mouth will pinch over to one side when you sort of snarl, or when you sort of one of your eyes closes in irritation. So I give it a bit of a tilt as well when I'm giving it a bit of a frowny face. And so now I'm going to start doing the inking for the eyes. I'm of the eyes visible through hair camp. It's one of the things about seeing a lot of the old 90s and 80s anime is it does things to you. But some parts I've managed to fight. You'll notice there's no hair intakes on this one. That's a difficult thing for me to get over. And then a bit more there, just get the eyes in. I don't want them too hard and angular, just because the hair is already so angular. I don't want them to sort of disappear. The eyes need to be a sort of focal point. So I want to make sure they've got as much contrast of, of value, of line, shape, that kind of thing. And now I'm just flipping the canvas to make sure everything's okay. There's some opportunities to get some of them a bit sort of sharper. And the other thing I've got to remember is there's already going to be quite a bit of contrast on them, because I'm planning to do the black sclera on them, which will automatically give them quite a lot of contrast. So that one, I'm just going to redo that eye because I'm not feeling it. So I'm just taking a bit of a hard look at it. I think edited out me going for a cuppa just there. So this is 5 minutes just passed. So I want to sort of get a fresh pair of eyes on it. So if you do need to do the same thing, whenever you're drawing, do take breaks. Your productivity resets back to full, because after 2 hours, your productivity just tanks. You feel like you're doing a lot because you just get tired, but you're not actually getting anything done. Just getting that sort of position right for the eye there. I just really want to nail those in, just because they're such a critical bit of sort of focus of the image. So getting the space between them wide enough, but not too wide, getting the angle right for them. With an annoyed face, you can actually get away with quite a lot, just because the face will get a bit asymmetrical when you're irritated. Like you'll have a furrowed brow, so you'll get away with quite a lot of sort of asymmetrical positioning of the eyes, just for the fact that an annoyed face does make the eyes asymmetrical, like being sleepy. It's one of those ones. I think I've finally got an eye shape that I'm relatively happy with. So I'm just going to plan out the thicker sections. Again, it doesn't really matter because it's going to have like dark sclera, but I still want to have that weighting be even on both sides. And I guess especially because at this point in the drawing, I wasn't 1000% sure that I was going to go with like black sclera and black hair. So I wanted to make sure I had the option there to have the sclera be white. I'm sort of just going to shuffle some of the details around a smidge. It's looking okay. I'm just rotating the canvas there to make that angle a bit easier to draw. This is what I was talking about before. If you're having trouble getting a line art section right, rotate your canvas or reposition yourself, or if you're working traditionally, rotate the paper. It's easier to draw certain things on certain angles from other angles just because of the way the wrist is pivoted. So if you're having trouble getting the line just right, it may just be a physical thing more than a drawing skill issue. You may physically be trying to draw an angle that is hard to draw, or a curve that is hard to draw with that hand position. Those filled in. I feel like the space is okay. And I'm just going to try and draw the irises in. And so I'm going to do them much towards the top of the eye. This gives them more of an impression of the character looking up. This helps sort of add to and sell the idea that the character is being viewed from a high angle. So the downward facing head gives it that sort of grr sort of look, and then the upward facing eyes help sort of communicate that difference in vertical, the difference in height between the subject and the viewer. And with the face largely done, I'm going to go on and do that little bit of hair. Just move sort of left to right. And that's looking okay. Bit shaggy, bit sort of square-edged. And then the ear in there, I do like a good pointy ear. And then the wing shape. This one I'm not going to put too much into because it's just going to be a big black silhouette, so it's not going to be like a really big thing. But I've realized I put the line of the wing there along a bit I was planning to do hair on. That's why the sort of top of the wing looked weird there for a sec. Sleeve coming in there, and you'll notice I've got a line coming across from the sleeve across to the front of the chest. So if you imagine the tension there of when the arm goes back, if you do it with your own sort of shirt right now, as you pull your arms back, the tension across the front of the shirt will increase. And so that's what I'm trying to allude to there with just some simple shapes. And speaking of alluding to things with simple shapes, here I'm trying to do sort of the implication of a hand without actually drawing the hand. Ended up looking a little bit too square, but things can never be perfect, but they can be finished. So I'm just going through the little bits of shirt detail now as I move down the image. And then doing the neckline of the shirt. You'll notice I've got some fairly angular shapes on the neckline there. One of the things to remember is you want to contrast the shape language of your clothing with the shape language of the figure. Which means if your figure has a lot of rounded sections in that area, it's worth exploring the more creased, the more sort of stiffness of the fabric to help that contrast against the other one. So it's important to have the contrast between the shape language of the garment and the shape language of the body. And then it's most of the upper body looking alright. The wings are in. And just doing some very simple shapes for the clothing as well. You'll notice I've also not done really much line weighting. That's because I do my line weighting as a separate step. You don't have to. You may be using a brush pen, and you may know where you want it to be thicker. You may know exactly where you want it to be thinner and why you're making it thicker and thinner. I do the thickness of my line art based on ambient occlusion, and in this case, I also do one to separate the object, so I'll do a separate, thicker layer of line art around the edge of the figure to help sort of carve them out of the background. Again, all I have to work with here is values, pretty much. So I'm using that as a way of making distinct one thing from another, whereas normally I might have a cooler color to help separate the character from the background. Here I'm going to using everything in my toolkit in terms of value and detail to pull things apart. So I'm just doing the very simple shapes here for the dress, or the skirt rather. A nice smooth section around. That one there, just trying to make up for the inconsistent distance there in the sketch. And putting the navel in. And then the shapes for the thighs there. Remembering to have that little bit of a slight dip in, or at least a reduction in the curve for where the sartorius pulls on the leg above the knee there. And then big sock. Trying to avoid like too much repetition of piece size. So just like I was saying before with fabric, this is the same thing. So having a big fold and then a fold that is the same size, it will look kind of mechanical and unfabric-like. Fabric tends to not have creases that are all exactly the same size. So if you have creases on your image, you want to make sure you've got a more organic rhythm to them, where you have, big, small, medium, and then you don't repeat those exact sizes. You can have variations of them, of course, but try to, wherever possible, avoid reusing the same size or thickness for a section or a fold that you've just used. It'll make it look unfabric-like, and it'll hurt the overall impact of your image. All right, now doing the other leg. And you can see again there's that dip in just above the knee for the sartorius, and there's a knee goes back into the calf, and you can see there's a real sort of bend to the shin bone. All the bones are actually kind of curved. The reason being, if they're all straight, when you landed on them, it'd be like a spring. It'd have to just explode if you didn't have any curl to it. And so the same thing happens to your bones. They've got a bit of curve to them because they've got a bit of flex, and that's the curve along which they flex and absorb force. And so with that, you can sort of accentuate that with how you put the legs together, because that curve is present in the way they're structured, and it does present in a very sort of subtle way, but you can push that presentation as well if you want. And then just doing the shoe here, trying to keep the other shoe in mind. I think this one, the laces would be visible on this one, where they'd be covered up with the other one, since the knee's coming further over it, I think. Whereas this one's a bit more straight. Maybe I should have done it on both, let's see. And then a little bit around there. And I'm not going to do much detail on like the cross laces across the front of the shoe, just a few bands would do there. And then the tail here, just leaving my smoothing up nice and high. It takes me a few goes on this one just because I don't want to have it go, like you can see there, it went thick to thin to thick to thin, like it didn't quite work. I had a few goes at this one because there is a necessity with it. It needs to have a fairly sensible taper, or at least be close to it. So I'm keeping the part of the tail line that worked, and just going from there to try and do the bit that didn't. And so since that wasn't working a couple of times in a row, start from the other end, and sure enough. So sometimes it can be the way you're drawing it that can mean the difference between that line working and it not working. So it's having to do Control-Z any more times than that. I would have started getting a different tool out. I was cloned the line over. And now I'm going to do the Angie brows. Now from a very high angle. Now when you're angry, the brows will actually meet the eye fairly close. And when you view a character from above, they get even closer. So if you're drawing these and they're actually touching or overlapping the eyes, that's fine. In fact, that's probably how it should be. I'm giving them a little bit of space because I like the distinctness between the brow and the top of the eye. I don't really like when sort of meld together, but that's a personal taste thing. And then just darkening some of the bits around the eye. Getting those bits of shape there, just to seal that off. I usually do actually leave a bit of a gap there. When you're wanting the character to look kind of cute, you'll have a really thick upper eyelash, and maybe not as much on the lower lash. Whereas this one, I'm not going for as cute of a look. And here I've realized that sort of mistake of having the more sort of slug-like shape for the horns, just making sure that looks sort of tighter and the horns look sort of more bulgy and more consistently tapering. Now I'm just going over the whole thing, seeing where I've got any errors to fix before I move on to the next one. My process, one of the things that really saves me a lot of time is having a very specific process of one step and then another step. So one of the things I'll do before I move on to the next step is I'll essentially sign off on the previous step. This means I'm never wasting time jumping back and forth between steps because I missed a thing. It's a good way of making your work a lot faster, not by making you actually work faster, but by removing things that slow down your path towards the finishing line. And so here you can see I'm just adding little dark sections there for ambient occlusion, just where things like the creases or the folds of things like the ridge in the horns or things like the head there, anywhere where ambient occlusion would occur, I'll put a little spot of black. And you can see I'm doing it on a separate layer, and I've colored the initial line art layer blue. Now the reason for this is that I want to make sure I don't miss any bits, because this effect looks great, but if you miss sections of it, you'll have sections of the image that just look a bit flatter, and it's kind of hard to tell why. So doing it like this lets me see which bits of it I've done, which bits I haven't, and then once I've finished, I just merge it all into one layer, but keeping it distinct while I'm working with it helps me know which bits have been done and which bits still need doing. So more of these little foldy bits here. So anywhere where two objects get closer, you've got less availability for ambient light to get in. That's just the light that's bouncing around from every angle. So the more sort of closeness you have between two objects, the less vectors by which ambient light can hit the surface, and the darker it gets. This is in my lighting video, if you want to have a look at that. And now, going in and getting some of the cheek there. And just adding a bit more thickness to the sides of the hair as well. And adding a bit of darkness here as well, around where the neck is. And making sure I can close up any shapes that I've missed, close up any sections that have got a sort of gap. This is another good chance to go over your image and correct any mistakes. So you'll see there's a couple of bits where there's been just missing line art, where I've just missed it. And this sort of, by necessity, has an examination of your work that gives you an opportunity to pick up and fix anything you've missed. So anything you've got that sort of helps you check and prevents future mistakes or future sort of time invested going back on things when they become much harder to fix is definitely worth having. It really saves you a lot of time. Just throwing a bit of that same ambient occlusion between the folds of the pleats and the skirt there. And then a bit more there on the inside of the legs, where it'll be a bit darker. Again, I'll have the actual shading coming up. This is just the ambient occlusion shading. Interestingly, ambient occlusion is independent of your primary light source largely, simply because it's based off the ambient light, which is the light that's already been diffused. It's already been removed of any unified direction. So it's coming from everywhere all the time. So your ambient occlusion, your soft light, is independent of your direct lighting. Again, this is in my lighting video that will be in the description. And so I'm just adding a bit of these sort of creases and darkening the creases in the leg warmers here. And then adding a little bit between them. And another bit I've realized I've lost here is that I didn't do the strokes to imply the laces on the top of the shoe on this side here. So that's another thing I've caught there. And then just getting a bit of darkness on the sides of the shoes there, and maybe a bit more on that. And then these little sort of bits behind the tummy there, and a bit more on the navel. Realizing I missed another spot or two, like under the ear here, and behind there, and the hair and behind the head also. It's looking alright. I'll do a bit of a line for the crease, for the seam, sorry, in the shirt. And a little darker bit between the shoelace bits. I don't know how it's getting towards basically done. Maybe thickening that top eyelash a bit. That's the other thing I was saying, is if you've got a character who's supposed to look kind of cute, it can really help to give them a much heavier upper eyelash than bottom eyelash. And so now I'm going to start doing a bit of eye detailing. I add this one into the same step as the ambient occlusion line weighting, even though it's technically different things, it's just detailing the eyes. It's another section where I'm sitting here with the hard black on my line art layer, so they naturally sort of fit in together as the same sort of step. Yeah. Dark bits in the corners of the eyes there, sorry, the corners of the mouth, and on the nose there to really sort of pull it out. And then some hard black for the center of the eye. I won't typically do hard black for the center of the eye, but with an image like this, it's going to be grayscale. It's important to get that sort of impact in. So I've just merged those two together, and now I'm going to get my hue and saturation adjustment. I'll make sure you can see that one there. So Control U on the keyboard, or go edit image. I think it's like tonal correction, but Control U, get your keyboard shortcuts going. Don't be a mouse potato. I'm just flipping it and giving it a bit of an eyeball, a bit of a check. Just make sure everything's landing the way I want. Getting an eye for any detail bits where I've got some line art in the wrong spot, or the missing bits. Here I decided I want to put a bit more thickness just on that bit of the jawline there. With everything that's going to be going on, I really want to make sure that I'm pulling the face off the torso. So I'm going to give it a much thicker bit of line art there, just to really make sure it has its own distance. It's been carved out and separated from the line work for the torso. Here's, once you do that, you've kind of got to do it everywhere, because otherwise it'll just look like there's an inconsistently thick bit of line. I'm also going to throw just a really sort of hard little implied kind of ambient cast shadow looking thing there, just near the chin, just to really carve that out and really separate it. And here, that line's coming too far up, so I'm just going to clean that off there. This is just a bit of fine tuning before I sign off on the line art, before I move on to the next step. That's looking alright. Yeah, I can feel okay with that. Alright, now I'm going to go over and do with a brush with a ton of smoothing on it, just a bit of an outline around the image, just to help sort of pull it out from the background. That's one of the things that Lineart can do. It can imply lighting, like in shadow, like I've got with the ambient occlusion, but also you can use it as an object separator. So what I mean by that is that the thicker the line art, the more the implication of separation between it and the objects around it. So I'm doing this to pull the character off the background and make sure there's a visual impact of the big thick line to communicate that difference in depth and placement. And the bigger the difference in distance between the object and the one behind it, the thicker the line art. So for this, I want the thickest line art to be the very outer outline, and then get thinner as we go to more internal shapes. And then other shapes, I won't do line art at all. So for instance, you'll notice later on when I'm doing the shading, there's things that you might do for line art to describe things like the clothing folds, but instead of describing them with an actual line on the page, the other kind of line you can use is you can use the edge of a section of tone. So you can have the tone or shading just cut off very sharply, and that difference, that jump in levels of darkness will give the same effect as a piece of line art without having the other effect that the line art has, which is that it divides the object up. It kind of cuts things up and makes separate objects of it. And that's starting to look okay. The line weighting is really sort of helping pick the image up. And just fixing up some of the bits of the hair there. And then any of these little gap bits I've done, or at least any of the gap bits that I notice, I'm going to fix them up. Now you notice I haven't done it for things like the tail and the wings, because they're going to be filled with black anyway, so I don't have to worry about thickening their line art because they're going to be black. And so I've now got another layer. I'm going to call this new layer my flats. It's going to sit underneath my line art. I've got the bucket tool. I've set the bucket tool to refer only to editing layer, which is why it filled the entire frame. I've got to set it to refer other layers. Now, when the bucket drops its color, or in this case just tone, it's going to look at every layer, and it's going to look at the image overall to decide where those thresholds are for it to stop filling. So if your bucket fills everything, that'll be the thing. It's your setting there. And I'm just seeing whether I want to put some tone in some other spots. I've accidentally drawn the background, so I'll just undo that. Control Z. Who's crying over spilled ink? There we are. And I'll try and reuse some of the tones here wherever I can. Similar to wanting to reuse colors, because reusing your colors helps make the image a bit more cohesive. The same thing is kind of true with, if you're just using a grayscale image, you'll have areas of tone, and you'll want to kind of repeat those areas of tone. So you'll have areas of tone that you'll want to sort of repeat. So just dropping in those bits of tone around there. And then the dark sclera. I'm not going all the way black, but I am going fairly dark. If you squint your eyes, it'll look essentially black, but I want to have at least a bit of a sort of distinction there for the sake of detail. Now I go for the skin tones. I want the skin tone to be relatively dark, but not so dark that it sort of blends with the hair. So I'm going to give myself a sort of fairly light neutral grey to work on as my base layer now. And what this will do is, when you drop any kind of tone on pure white, it looks darker than it actually is. And if you drop any kind of tone on pure black, it'll look lighter than it is. If on an image like this, if I want to have a much more unbiased view of my light and dark tones, I'm working on a mid-tone or fairly light mid-tone grey, so that nothing looks too overpowered either way. and I can get a more sort of unbiased view of how light and dark everything is as I drop it. And I can change the tones, like I can change the values of the light and dark areas later as I go. That's fine. I just want to get them in now, and I can adjust them later after the fact. And so I've got some sort of white shirt there to really help that sort of upper body pop. And I'll do the same thing on some areas of the horns as well. And just a much lighter tone there. Those I won't go all the way white because I want to put a shine on them, and you can't have a shine on something that's pure white, so I'm just getting them fairly high. And a bit more of the white on the shoes there. Don't worry too much about them. Not very focal. Just going to duplicate my flats layer there. Now the reason I've duplicated my flats layer is when you do multiply shading, and I'm just going to darken this down by about 8 or 10. So this copy of the flats I'm making here is going to be what I use to control how dark my shading is. So you can see I've got my flats, a multiply layer above it. I've made a copy of my flats, and I've clipped that to this layer here. You can see layer 2. The net effect of that will mean that as I shade on my shading layer, the clipped layer will show up anywhere where there's like any brushwork. The benefit that has is that if, let's say, I wanted to shade this thing with pale grey, that would work fine on light tones, but pale grey doesn't have much darkness to it, so it just won't show up on the dark areas. So if I choose a much darker colour to shade with, it'll show up on the darker areas just fine, but then it'll be too strong for the light areas. It'll add too much darkness. So what I do, and I do this with color illustrations as well, is I'll make a copy of my flats, I'll darken it, and with color illustrations I'll give it a bit of a hue shift, and then I'll clip that to my shading layer, and then whenever I use my shading layer, it's as if I'm shading with a slightly lighter or slightly darker version of the color I'm going over. And that just helps me control that light and dark, so I don't have to go and pick the color every time or pick the lightness every time. I can just do this, and it'll do about 90% of the work for me. I'm thinking of doing a little YouTube short about that one too, because it keeps coming up as a little handy thing. It's something I invented in the same way, thousands of cavemen across the world invented hitting things with a rock, so they invented hammers, so it's not like I'm the only one to do it, I'm sure. But it's something that saves me a lot of time. Like, I'm sure there's about a dozen manhwa artists that do it. They probably have a much catchier name for it than I do. So, but I'm just doing a bit of shading here. You'll notice one of the big things I'm doing here is for an illustration like this, if I put too much detail in the shading, that could look kind of cool, but I want this image to have a lot of simplistic pop. That's what the style is about, that's what the shape language is about, so I'm going to make sure that this image has more impact, so I'm going to focus more on drop shadows and surface planes than giving individual sections of its soft, rounded shading. And here I realise I've missed a bit of the thigh there, so I'll just fill that in. That there. Looks good. The other thing that means is that if you do, and this is why you need to sign off on your flats, since I needed to correct the flats, that color correction layer, or in this case value correction layer, no longer works because it has sections missing. It won't update automatically. So I've got to make a duplicate of that layer. And the other thing I want to do is I'm just going to use the line weight adjustment tool to essentially expand and bleed out my fills, my flats. That way I won't have those little white gaps there. And now I'll duplicate that and then clip that to my multiply layer to get that control back in my shading. And of course remembering to darken it a little bit. The reason why I darken it a little bit and don't just use the existing values in it is if I'm shading right here over white, but the color controller layer is pure white, what happens is it tries to darken it by white, which doesn't do anything. So I bring it down by about 10 in brightness, just so that when I use it to shade white areas, I get a little bit of shading, and it still works fine on the rest of the areas as well. And so here I'm just throwing down some shading on the face. Again, I'm focused on things like drop shadows more than anything else, so big, simple areas of shadow more than anything else. I'm not going to do detailed things. I want big chunks of shadow to just give me big chunks of shape and form and describe the object. And so there again, so I've got like the top of the ear coming over and the bottom ear that's covered, and I've just got two big chunks of tone. And same thing here, I'm just going to erase that bit of the hair out there to make it very clear that it's the surface plane that's being shown there. And then we've got this section here of the neck where it's being shaded by the drop shadow from the chin. Now this one I was tossing up whether to have the entire section there shaded or not. I'll have the whole thing shaded. It really helps sort of pull that distance from the face to the sort of décolletage, the collarbone below. But letting that have a little bit of light as well helps me communicate the skin tone there. But that would have worked just as well if I'd shaded the entire thing out fully. And the rest of it, I'm going to do the drop shadow from the shirt over the abdomen. And just get big, simple shapes first. That's looking pretty good. And then the big shadows here dropped by the skirt onto the leg. Now you'll notice that I'm getting these nice fine sharp edges by using a gigantic big hard round brush. If you plan with the strokes, you can get a nice sharp edge with a massive round brush by just planning where and what order you drop the tone in. So I do this long horizontal stroke, then I erase it out vertically. Long horizontal stroke. And then I've got these nice big sweeping areas of tone, and I haven't had to pull out a little tiny fiddly brush to do them. I can have that big confidence of big brush and still have those nice sharp edges as well. So that's something I do recommend you get used to if you want. Using a really big round brush to do fine pointy edges, it's a really good way of sort of planning your strokes and how you do it, and good practice as well. And also, handy because you can keep on one brush size the entire time. Because you'll notice I will quite often do a big blob of tone and then cut it away. This helps me start from a position of using enough tone. A lot of people, myself included, will not use enough tone. They won't use enough large areas of shadow. They'll start building it out very tentatively. They gradually add shadow. Whereas having a big shadow and then carving bits out of it is a good way to start yourself off from a position of having strong, large areas of shadow that you sort of peel back from. Essentially better to ask forgiveness than ask permission, that kind of thing. And so now I'm just doing a bit more shading around the leg warmers and trying to be really irregular with it. Like you'll notice I don't have, even though the folds are roughly similar, I'm making sure that the shading I've got is not behaving the same. So I want larger areas of shading, none on one side, a whole bunch on the other side. I don't want to have everything look flat. So be irregular with it for the sake of sort of communicating that depth in your image. And a bit more of the drop shadow from the leg warmer onto the shoe. Drop shadows, again, they're fantastic. Anytime you get an excuse to drop a shadow from one part of the image to another, take it. They're the best value for effort. They're, that's the one you'll see whenever you watch anime. They do the shadow onto the chin, maybe shadow onto the boobs, and that's probably about it. Because they're big, they're easy, and they create massive amounts of depth. Detail shading is not something you'll see very often, just because the value of time spent versus the value in the image ratio is just not as high. So I'm just throwing a bit of tone there on the shoes. Now later on, I'll notice that I forgot to shade the skirt and I'll have to come back and do it, so if you have to jump around the video to follow along with that bit, my apologies. But the skirt shading happens later. It's not supposed to, but it does. And then a bit more sort of drop shadow from the hair onto the clothing there. Again, it doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. I just want to have the rough shapes projected down onto it. And then here, I'm going to take the opportunity to just assume that a whole half of the torso is just completely shaded out. Now, the lid from above, so that probably wouldn't be necessarily as accurate, but it gives me a good chance to give it some sort of unbalanced tone usage. I want things to be a bit unbalanced. I want there to be less symmetry for something that is sort of straight on pose. So shading one whole arm out and leaving the other whole arm lit can be a good idea. Things like you'll notice as well on the bangs on the side of the face. I've got one of them just fully shaded and one of them just fully lit. They'll look fine, and it helps create a bit of depth and helps create a bit of variance in the surfaces. It helps sort of separate and carve things out from one another. So that's one thing I do recommend you do if you are doing more sort of cell shading you think, or even if you're not, is have whole sections of the image just shaded out, not necessarily because it matches the lighting, but because it looks cool. And here I realized that the tone I was using had a couple of different grays to it, so I'm just evening that out. But that's purely for my own sort of organization, so I'm not going to do anything to the image. And so now, again, I realize the skirt needs shading. We will come back to that. I'm going to do some highlights. So this is going to be just white, and I'm going to look at the whole thing, just get a better idea of it. And just doing, again, this is with my hard round brush. I'm blobbing it in, and then I carve it out. With shine, one of the things to remember with shine is that if the edge of the shine is soft, it will not look like the thing is glassy. One of the effects of having like a glassy, shiny object is that it makes the edges of the shine very crisp and clear. If you imagine a mirror, as you have like a curved mirror, things towards the edge of the curved mirror don't get blurry, they get compressed and they get narrow, and the detail actually gets sharper. So if you want something to look glassy and shiny, make sure the edges of the shine are crisp and clean, and the sharper the edge of each of the shine elements, the more glassy and glossy the thing will look. And a bit more there, that's looking good. And so I'm also adding, not just the blobs, some chunks that I've cut out. I'm also adding some sections that go long as the lighting sort of picks up along those edges of the ridges of these little lumps of the horn there. And trying to be as irregular as I can with these. I don't like that bit. It doesn't. I'm just going to redo that. It didn't go from one to the other. So I'm going to get rid of it there, and I don't really even need a shine there either, because that section wouldn't even be picking some up, so I can sort of forget that. I need to mainly focus on having the shine on the top and having the shine die off as it goes down and around the horn. Now the other thing is, white would probably be a bit overpowering. Like you can see the bit I'm about to do on the hair here, if I left it as white, it would be too much, it would be overpowering, it wouldn't look good. I'm getting the white in, and then getting the shape right by carving it out, and then I'm going to go over after the fact and with a big soft eraser and just gradually shave some of its opacity away so it becomes less of a completely opaque white and just a bit of a lightening film over the top of it. But I want to get the shape first, so it's easy to get the shape when I can see it clearly. So I'm letting it be pure white now while I cut away into it to get the shape. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go back in, once the shape is what I like, and lighten the whole thing. And it doesn't matter if it's not completely neat, like those little bits of variance there, you can see on the edges where I've erased out the white edge, and it's got maybe little sort of blurry sections, that's fine. For a shine, shines are meant to have a bit of sort of maybe blur to the edges, as well as the crisp edge. And that can look like that sort of glow or that sort of soft focus you get, where you can still see the soft focus as well as that hard edge to it. So I'm not going to be too concerned about that. As long as there are nice sharp edges to it, it will communicate that shine. And so I'm now breaking up the shine along that front part of the hair there, having some parts get long and some parts with like a gap, and just drawing them in, cutting them out until I get the amount that I'm sort of happy with and the placement that I'm sort of happy with. And the same thing on these bits on the side here, just sort of cutting bits away. Is it going right? Right. That's the shine there. Oh, that's the wrong eraser. I'll switch over to my big soft eraser. And so now I'll go over with very gentle pressure, not erase it out completely, but just sort of weaken it a bit. So it's still a shine, it's still a bit of a sheen on the hair, but it's less overpowering. And I'll take slightly more away towards the sides there than the center. And so now I'm going to add some shine to some other spots as I go down the image. I'm realizing I feel like I want a bit of a shadow here on the nose. Now I know it feels a bit silly to have a shadow on the nose on the top bit. For years I didn't actually understand why I was doing it. I just did it because it was in illustrations I liked, and when I did it, it looked right. I couldn't quite understand it. So that shadow you see on top of the nose isn't a shadow based on the direction of the lighting. That's actually an ambient occlusion shadow simulating the way the top of the ridge of the nose furrows into the brow. Because you'll notice that the top of the nose actually goes into the skull a bit. Much like the eyes sink in, so the top of it does, and that shadow there is that ambient occlusion darkness you get from things sinking into the skull, like those little shadows you get just on the top of the eyelid there, when the face is fully lit. That one there is an ambient occlusion shadow, not a directional light shadow. So that's what that one is, and you'll tend to do it actually a little bit lighter. I'll go over and lighten it a bit. Here I'm actually doing the shading for the skirt that I forgot. Now that I've realized I forgot that bit of shading on the nose, I'm also doing the skirt. I'm not going to do too much on it. I'm going to make sure the shadows kind of match the lighting I've set up roughly for how I've lit the navel and the torso there. I'm just going to do a bit more around the top sort of ridge, the rim there, because these are all sort of fairly big flat panels, the pleats and the skirt, so they're going to either be lit or unlit essentially, just based on their angle because they're not very sort of curved. And so I'm just going to pick up where that line of shading went off the side of the body and then continue that line out across the pleats of the skirt, because the drop shadow is probably going to be how they get most of their shading. That's alright. I reckon that's sort of a large part of it. I'm just going to get this crease here, so I put a fair bit in. I'm just going to cut some of it out now, because I want a bit of a, like as the legs are sort of coming forward, or the body's going down, whichever, there'll be a crease in the pleats as the legs raise up, and so I want to sort of allude to that if I can, just very simply, without going too much into detail. Alright, now going back to the highlights, where I should have been finishing my work. Now the other thing I want to do is the skin tone variation. Now if I was in colour, this would be done in a sort of blush colour, and so I've selected all the skin tones, and I'm just doing some of these little strokes here, just in the shading colour. The only reason I'm doing that is just it gives a bit of sort of blush to it. It gives a bit of tone that I like. It makes it sort of more, more personable. And so now I'm on my shading layer, and I've selected the figure and then reversed the selection, so I can't shade on the figure. That's what the running ants there are about. And so I'm doing big blobs of cast shadow from the feet, and then I'm going to erase most of it out and just leave two very gentle shadows, just to have that sort of that directional lighting alluded to with the shadows on the ground. And again, I'm not going to keep much of them at all. Let me look over to see what else needs some shading, or maybe needs less shading, I'm not sure. Maybe a little bit of darkness on the background there, just a little bit of a grade from light to dark as we move up the image. If you imagine the person standing like in the bottom of like a bowl, like a half pipe or whatever, as the things move away from them towards the background, it'll start to curve upwards, and as it curves upwards, it doesn't face the light source as much. And so here, I'm just making selections of the different areas of tone and just tuning some of them in more, like darkening the skin and also darkening the hair a little bit. I want a bit more contrast, so I'm just going to pull that down a fair way, just to make that really sort of pop and really give that a bit of depth. I feel like that's working all right. And now I've just grabbed the luminosity on the horns. I'm just changing the lightness on that just to give it a bit more contrast so it visually sort of lifts off the page. If you see, one of the things I'm doing at this point is I'm actually looking in the top right of the screen here a lot when I'm adjusting the tones, because that's a great way to see how the image works as a thumbnail, how the image works as like that instant pop from when you see it. And so now I'm just going to add maybe a little sort of logo on the shirt or something, like a number. I think I went with like 02 as like an O ni, like a demon, or like ni is the, you know, it's a weeb joke. And so I'm going to there. That's why you put that character in the pink head one, in the mecha one. It's called 02 because that's O, as in like 0. You could say O, it's a letter but not a number, whatever. Like O and 2 is ni and O ni, and so she's the thing with horns. Oni. That's the joke. It's funny. And so I'll do sort of the cross through the middle there to show it's a 0. And then I'll do the 2 here. I'm trying to sort of roughly just sort of imagine where the distortion would be in the fabric and kind of map the numbers to it. I don't have to actually do a good job. It's the reason why I'm confident just give it a red hot go. Because if it's hard for me to understand, it'll probably be hard for the viewer to understand too accurately anyway. So I mean, if they're going to have trouble and I have trouble, then we're on the same boat. So I don't feel like anyone's going to be too much better. So maybe thickening some sections of it, maybe that works. Yeah, roughly, it'll be fine. Sort of sharpening those numbers up a little bit. Cutting off some of the excess, just neatening up a smidge. Looking at it from zoomed out, see if I need to do any more, whether that's good enough. I feel like that's good enough. Alright, lovely. Now I'm going to duplicate everything into a new layer. You can see I made a new layer, so merge visible to new layer. Then I'm going to use this just as a bit of a softening effect. So the image is done now. This is post-processing. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the layer itself. I'll lower the opacity to about 30-40%. Now that you won't see anything there because it looks the same as what's under it. But now when I go to filter and I go to blur and I go to Gaussian blur or Gaussian blur, and I'll do a little bit of that, and you'll see that it gives that little bit of soft edge, that little bit of blur to the edge of it. It's just a nice effect. I think it looks nice. If it's not your cup of tea, that's fine. But with that, we are finished. Now, if you enjoyed drawing along, if you did indeed draw along and didn't just fold washing, then I'd love to see your work if you want to post it in the Discord. If yours is a different thing, if yours is instead it's an angel, a shark, a tax agent, whatever it is, I'd love to see it. And if you like this video and you like sort of drawing along, then I've got a bunch more in a playlist that I'll put in the description as well. These are just some of the videos in that one. It grows every now and then because I put one of these between each of my tutorial videos. If you like them, have a red hot go. And of course, there's also the tutorial videos themselves. Now, if you like what you see and you want to support the channel, then like, subscribe, leave a comment with things you'd like to draw next time or tutorials you'd like to see. And if you are in a position to do so, then you can consider becoming a member on our Patreon, which really helps me sort of produce these videos. So if it is something you'd like to do, your generosity is appreciated by myself and of course everyone else who gets to see the videos. So that's much appreciated. And if you do want to join the community, again, pop into the Discord. Everyone there is great. We have events and exercises and things to do there as well. The last one's just wound up, which is the one on, I think it's not safe for work. Very wholesome images, but just things you wouldn't actually do in the workplace, like using a microwave and a forklift. But with that, I'll let you go, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. You have a good one. Cheers. Bye.